Welcome to the Beauties Podcast, where we talk about everything you need to know about women's sports. From the grassroots to the pros, we got it all.
Today on the show, we address one of our most asked listener questions and share our thoughts and opinions on whether girls should play boys hockey.
Here are your hosts, Addie and Cowie.
Welcome everyone to the Beauties Sports Desk. It is another rainy day for us here, and that is okay because we have a bunch of awesome topics to be going over because we reached out to all of you, and holy moly, did you give us some feedback. Cowie, how are you feeling today?
Oh, I am sick of the rain, but it feels less bad. I guess we're used to it now. It feels like it's rained for weeks on end.
It's crazy.
It does make you feel better when you put something out into the world and you never know how it's going to do. You hope people are going to interact with it, but we don't know.
Yeah.
But they did. And big thank you to everybody who chimed in on our Instagram. We put up a series of questions on our stories, and not everyone, but a lot of you participated, and I think it gave us some insight into where you come from and your time in sports and where you focus your time in sports. For one, it gave us some direction on where we should focus for two. And then there was just a few funny things that came through there.
Oh, yeah. Always a good classic one thrown in there from some buddies. But when we talk about beauties, it's first and foremost, right? It's a platform that we talk about everything women's sports, but there's so many conversations. Like, I would say when we looked at the feedback that we were getting from a lot of people, there's still just a bunch of, conversations that are kind of thrown into the air, like work-life balance, being a competitive young woman, like all these things that people genuinely want to hear about and want to learn about.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we definitely learned is that we're still at a point in sports that there aren't a ton of resources for what you think of after you've been through it and lived it as fairly common knowledge. But we've all learned it by experience.
Yeah.
And there aren't a ton of resources out there for you to either access or listen to that help you navigate that as you go into that next phase of sports, whether you're a parent with a kid going away to a prep school or university, whether you're a university or a high school athlete that's graduating going to university, there's not a lot out there. So there's a ton of places that we can go and have conversations and bring people in to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. And it was interesting that people, gravitated to a little bit more of the harder topics, like the more nitty gritty, let's get to the bottom of it topics, which we're all in for,
It's cool. It's, we've talked about where's that fine line. We never want to come across as thinking that our opinions are concrete in any way. The purpose of us sharing our opinions or thoughts is A, based on experience, and B, really to spur and stir conversation that helps us grow as a collective.
Because there's still, and I think a lot of people don't truly understand that how much we've evolved and grown as a collective of women's sports, but we're still hanging on to old narratives of like 25 years ago. And I think that that's a really big shift that a lot of, parents of young girls are feeling, girls that go through the process and they're like, well, wait a second, what's going on here? And so I think that shifting the narrative and what we've talked about a lot of beauty sports is rethink how you think about women's sports. We need to start thinking different about the terminology, the way we talk to young girls, the conversations that are surrounding sports, the values that we're putting on girls at a young age when it comes to sports, because that's truly where it starts.
Totally. It is. I love the rethink because I think you being myself, everyone that's listening included, I think if we can continue to do that throughout the course of our life, whatever that may be, to be open-minded and considerate of the fact that you may need to rethink. That's something you learned. I talked about it on last week's episode, that there's words that I can change in my vocabulary. I need to rethink how I talk to our young athletes.
Yeah.
It's part of growth.
And every person in this world that hears the term, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, gets it right away, because it's easy to say the same old things over and over and over again. But I think the bigger thing that we have to start thinking about is who's listening. Because if we're saying the same things over and over again, whether, we can just dive right into it, it's better to play with boys.
Yep.
Who's listening? Because then the girl on the other end of that, all she's hearing is that boys are better and that they're second tier. And that has just been the most, and we're going to talk about a ton of things today, but that was one of the most prevalent things that people brought up. And we need to start thinking about the words that are coming out of our mouth and what people interpret them as when they're listening to them.
Yep. Just because you say one thing and think you mean one thing, that unless it is very clear, unless you are very clear and specific, and make sure you outline what you intend or what you mean when you say those words, they are up for interpretation 100 different ways.
Oh, for sure. And the amount of people that have come up to me over the years and said, Ads, my daughter's played boys hockey. I'm like, oh, not the right spot. That's just not me. That's just, what does that mean to me? Yeah. What does that mean? What's going on there? So there's so many, when we talk about the conversations surrounding sports, I think that is one of the biggest pieces that we need to start thinking about is who's listening. Well, you got young ears. They're like sponges. They take everything 100% verbatim and they believe it to their core.
Yeah. So we had, like Addie mentioned, we had a few people come through on Instagram and give us a lot of that gender reference or asking for our thoughts and opinions of, should my girl play boys hockey the question came in as, in quotes, to be more competitive versus female hockey. And then the secondary question of that is how do we navigate that in more rural communities? So let's start with the first question.
the big question.
Let's start there because I know, and so let's preface this. For anyone who doesn't know Addie has spent her entire life in sports and then post-secondary work life in sports, growing female sports, hockey specifically.
Yeah.
So this is a very big passion. You've spent a ton of time, energy, thought here, and we're going to break that down together today.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to float that out to you to start with. Should girls, and we can chat about it, should girls play boys hockey?
And so this, we talk about hockey a lot, but I think this could be
transferred across sports.
And so I spoke at a conference a while ago, and I know that I've referenced this story before, but it just always kind of hits me. Girls have the largest dropout rate between the ages of 14 and 16. Mm-hmm. It's like 63% of girls that are in minor sports drop out.
Yep.
And for me, that is alarming. That's an alarming number.
Yep.
And we need to think, okay, so all the girls that are in the pro levels right now of every single sport, 63% of them prior have just quit. Mm-hmm. So then it's like, okay, well, why? Why are girls quitting so much? And I keep coming back to, it's the way that we speak to them when they're 10 and under. And specifically 10 and under, because that's where you create your value system. That's when you're learning about the world and life and where you fit and how you navigate through all the different pieces of society and sport and all that kind of stuff. But when we get into the nitty-gritty of this question, mm-hmm. For me, this is the conversation that I was kind of mentioning before of we're still hanging on to conversations and narratives that were 25 years ago today still.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was talking about, is that it's a hard conversation to address because any female mentor, any female coach, not any, but a large majority, I am going to throw out a 90% value here. There is no statistical analysis done. That is just from time in sport. that people at the most elite level today, based on just where we are, this is more hockey specific just because hockey has lagged in its development.
Right.
In hockey specifically, the people who are at the top of the class on our Olympic teams in the PWHPA grew up playing boys hockey. And so from them, they have one lived experience, and they started in boys, and likely at some point they had to have either left home to seek, or their rural or city place developed female hockey, and they made that jump.
Yeah.
And so our references as a society lean back to those elite players. How did they become so elite? And when our reference point is that these elite players, 90% of them grew up in boys hockey, it skews that answer.
Yeah.
And that is skewed in the sense of, in the 90s, when you and I are playing hockey, there was no girls, or it was way the hell harder to find.
Yeah.
And so we had, as a community of female hockey players, really not much choice other than to play with the boys.
And it's the perfect example. So I was playing AAA hockey in the city, boys.
Yep.
And my gym teacher came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to start a girls hockey team here?" And I was like, 100%.
Yeah.
I spent my first practice showing girls how to get dressed.
Yep.
So, and I have a vivid memory of this, sitting in the rink and a coach coming up to my parents saying, "You got to get her out of here. She's got to go. She's got to go somewhere else." And it's just such a different time. Mm-hmm. And it's to the point where when we look at these conversations and we hear these things of people still almost holding it as a badge of honor, women's and girls hockey has increased, like, what is it, 350% over the last 5 years alone. Mm-hmm. So we're not even talking about when I was in university, like the last 5 years alone. But we're still talking as if we're 25 years ago. And so those are things that when I look, we as coaches, we as parents, we as family members have to do our part in changing that narrative to be like, now when your daughter gets and signs up for whatever minor hockey, there's AA teams, A1 teams, A2 teams, and A3 teams.
Yep.
All girls.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. And so, I went down a rabbit hole before we started press record today. My mom is an educator. I grew up in that world with her. And so we've talked a lot about Title IX. I'm not going to go and beat this up, but Title IX came into place in the 70s, long before you and I were even a thought. And it was about gender equity, and instead of having same-sex phys ed classes, it was co-ed phys ed classes. And then, so there is a ton of research that's been done around co-ed, the mixing and mingling of boys and girls in youth sports specific to phys ed. And the one thing that you can go and find the data to support it is that before kids hit puberty, if they are afforded an equal opportunity with equal expectations, with equal accessibility, with equal practice time, there is no study that shows that they don't have the same ability to progress from endurance testing, strength testing, power testing, speed testing, any of those things pre-puberty. And so that is where I also said to you is that as a society, we often give, and this is hockey specific again, we often give our little boys, before they can walk, we give them a mini stick and a ball. And we push them to play. And as a society, we often don't afford our little girls that same opportunity.
Yeah. And
so right from the get-go, even before we put skates on them at 4, let's call it, and get hockey equipment and put them on the ice, the scale has already been tilted in the favor of our boys. When I said those, equal opportunity, and I said of practice time.
Yeah.
They have 4 years of on their knees on the carpet practice time that our little girls weren't afforded.
And the conversation surrounding it. And this is the one thing that I always say is, how many times do you see your little boy in the basement and then it's like, oh, you're going to be a draft pick one day. Like those conversations are constantly surrounding young boys. And I make a joke about this all the time. Harry, when we took him home from the hospital, was drafted to the NFL like 6 times. They're like, look at the mitts on this boy, wide receiver. Like we hadn't even left the hospital and he was already being pushed in that category, which, don't get me wrong, I'm like, yeah, he's going to go first overall. But when you see the difference in the way that we speak at such a young age, I think that is the key, because then girls don't put value in it. Mm-hmm. They don't put value in that. And then we even have somebody like Bailey Dirksen jump on, and she's like, I was so competitive. Yeah. And it's like that needs to be a conversation that we have more and more and more with our girls. And when you talk about blanket slate, right? That you were just saying, if we have the equal everything going up, and it's like, if you give your son a stick and your daughter a stick, okay, perfect. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's even a little bit more in the sense of I've coached 7-year-old girls, like 7, that have come up to me and said, my parents said that if I was good, I'd actually be with the boys. So I'm just here for fun. Yeah. And you're 7. Yep. So for me, like, definitely the conversation of, allowing them to experience sport at a young age, but it's the way that we talk. It's the way that we interpret all these different conversations. And we go back to the dinner table test. If you look on one side and you can say it to your son and be like, yeah, you can, if you work hard enough, you can get to the NFL and wherever, or the NHL. And then you look over at your daughter and he goes, it's just for fun. Yeah. You're there to make friends. Yeah. Everybody knows you're in sports to make friends. Everybody knows you're in sports because it's the best time of your life. Yeah. But that small little subtle thing, I hear it all the time. Yep. Boys, no, you're on a mission. You're on a path. You're progressing through this process. Mm-hmm. And girls, you're here to make lifelong friends and to get an education. Yeah. And it is one thing here, we have not answered, and I don't think that we're going to answer that question today. We're going to give you things to think about. And that is exactly, Addie, hands-on nailed it, of if you're putting your child in boys hockey and you're using the words of it's more competitive or it's better hockey, that to me is damaging, in that you're painting a picture for your child, your daughter, that the only way that they can progress is by competing with boys. If you put them in because their best friends are boys and they enjoy it, and it is about all of the right things that sport is supposed to bring you. If you're in a rural community and that's what's most accessible to you, then your kid we would encourage you every day to choose sports. Yeah. At the end of the day, the core of the whole thing is choose sports. Yeah. Like, choose sports. And the accessibility piece of it, you're right. Like, that takes it down a whole, if you live in a town that doesn't have enough girls to make a team, well, then you have to play boys. Like, that's just what it is. Or right? You have to, like, I think back to me growing up, I played boys in Souris because that's what was there. And I played 2 years in Deloraine, which is 45 minutes away, 2 years in Holland, which is an hour away, a year in Brandon. And then I finished off playing, at that point, we finally had a kind of collective girls team based out of Reston. I played boys at home and I traveled for girls. And I think that maybe is part of the message too, is that I would also encourage you to seek the opportunity for your daughter to play girls hockey. They ultimately are going to have to. And I think there's also a conversation that we could have around safety, around mental health, that if you are putting your daughter in boys hockey, that there needs to be the conversation of when it becomes based on physiological size alone unsafe. If they want to seek post-secondary, they're going to have to play girls hockey. If you lived in a rural community and there was more girls that were playing hockey, what would the boy do? I mean, who knows, but where is that an example? Like, hypothetically, And hypothetically, that's what I keep on going back to. Like, everyone's like, oh, well, with, what if it was the opposite? What if it was the flip?
But I think the answer is the same. But we can't. What if the world was dominated by women and men were considered the secondary gender and whatever? Then I think we're in the same scenario, is that we have a little boy playing on a girls team, and we're having this same conversation in the reverse in 2022, because it's all about get out of this old bullshit mentality that there is a difference.
Yeah. And so that's the point of thinking, because everyone's always like, what if it was the reverse? I ran co-ed camps for years.
Yeah.
Years.
Yeah.
And you'll never guess what, if the little boy showed up and it was a bunch of girls, co-ed camp, anybody can register, it doesn't matter. That boy did not ever come back.
Yeah.
Same camp, same age group, same whatever. But we expect girls to be like, oh, what an incredible opportunity for you to skate with the boys.
It's the badge of honor thing. And that's part of, as a culture, that we need to change. It cannot be, this is the part that we struggle with. Sorry, I'm going to rabbit hole here a little bit, is that women have to continue to, quote unquote, break the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
In that it is a badge of honor. People say it to me in my work life. I work in I work in agriculture. Most of my peers are men. We're starting to see that scale tip, which is awesome. But people think of it as a badge of honor, like you used it. Whether it's sports or life, you lived that same experience. You spent your time in a male-dominated world, and people looked at it as a badge of honor. Props to you, bud, that you can survive there, essentially.
Yeah.
And the inverse of that, it's the same. You think about a male nurse and what they experience. Because,
1,000%.
quote unquote, that is a female industry.
That's right.
And we need to get out of that garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the trickle down effect is what we're experiencing right now. You get 25 years down the road and nothing has changed. If we don't start talking about it and holding ourselves accountable to change the conversation.
Well, and that's the thing that I think that is super exciting, is the fact that we have parents. A lot of these questions came from parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have parents genuinely asking for thoughts and advice because they want to make the right choice for their kid.
Yeah.
And they want to make sure that it's well thought through and well understood. And I think that is such a positive. It's so much stronger in that way. That we have a generation now of parents who are starting to think in a different way than this old school mentality.
I completely agree. I think the more parents grow up in this, I guess, new kind of world, and there are more women and people in these positions to say, let's start thinking about this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then it allows these awesome conversations to happen. And we only get better when we talk about it.
I know.
We only get better when we talk about it. And this always has been a topic that's super touchy for people. Super touchy when you break it down, because some people, I had a conversation with a dad once, and I was kind of telling him the same stuff.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I think I'm going to put my daughter in boys tryouts next year. They said, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like, why?
Yeah.
And I said, honestly, like, when we talk about values, I was like, you can do anything. You're the parent.
Yeah.
You're the parent. You have to do what's best for your kid. But let's talk about it. And he took it so personal that he had done something wrong for his daughter. And I'm like, no,
that's not what we're suggesting.
That's not even close.
No.
But the conversation can't be personal. It needs to be open. It needs to make sure that we have more conversations after this, because this is a big topic. And just from being in the back end of hockey for so long, it has a massive trickle effect. Massive.
Yeah, and it's also why we need to continue to invest in growing the female game and the accessibility of it, because they're also, you think back people would have the same perception in that it's more competitive if you play with the boys. The perception is also that you have better coaching if you play with the boys in a lot of ways. And if we need to continue to invest in this female infrastructure, I'm just going to go down a coaching rabbit hole here, is that I would suggest that, and I've had a conversation outside of this with someone on it, is that right now, 2022, and I'm going to talk specifically in this province, when you look around at the women who are coaching, in almost every scenario, they are more qualified than a lot of their male counterparts. There's a lot of dads, and I will never shit on a dad for volunteering.
Never.
Ever. My parents did it. It's the only way that this stuff runs, is if people step up and put their name on the sheet and volunteer.
Yeah.
Not shitting on you at all for that.
Yeah.
What I am saying is that we are at a point now, generationally, where women who are in the sport at a coaching level, a majority of the time, have gone through a post-secondary, played at a university level, gone away through Hockey Canada systems and all of these things, and are actually, in a lot of scenarios, likely more qualified than the male counterpart that they're either standing beside or standing across, and yet are still viewed, and you've experienced this in your own life, as, oh, it's okay, I'll get a dad.
Oh, happened to me yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could go down this road big time, because there is something special. So I always say, when I went away to Warner, I went to a prep school in Southern Alberta, and it was the first time that I truly experienced hockey, and I was in grade 10, and it was the first really very much competitive all girls team that I had ever been on.
Sure.
Right. And there's something special about it, and there's something different. And I think one of the biggest conversations when you get through and you go through post-secondary, you go to a prep school and whatever, coaching girls, and this is going to be controversial for some people, and that's okay, is different. It is different. And I've experienced it myself, and I've coached it myself, and I've lived it. Mm-hmm. And when you get onto a team that is essentially all high-level athletes, coached by a woman who has lived it,
yep,
and knows your specific pathway, knows the way you're going, it's absolutely infectious.
Yeah.
And that's what, every person in the world knows the pathway of little boys. Yeah. Everyone. Mm-hmm. It's very unique to find a woman coaching at a high level that can look down and be like, well, are you going to do this, or this? Mm-hmm. Because this is your pathway. And it's like, holy man,
yeah,
you feel so viewed, you feel so valued, you feel all these things that you should feel within sports because they've lived it. Mm-hmm. And when women still get pushed to the side because, we're just maybe not ready for an all-female coaching staff yet. Yeah. It's enough to kill me. Yeah. These women have not only lived it, they've experienced, they competed in it, they've been successful in it. Yep. And we just don't know 100% yet if you can handle it.
Yeah, we're going to throw a male mentor on your back.
Yeah. We're just going to have this guy kind of follow you around and make sure you're okay. Oh, you mean the guy that never played female hockey and never did anything of what, and it sounds kind of mean, I don't mean it that way, but it's you have no idea what I've been through as a female athlete. And we've had Liz Knox on the show, who is literally grinding every single day with all the PWHP board members and stuff, because they get it. They understand the pathway. They understand what's going on there.
Yep.
That board does not have one man on it.
Yeah.
Because how could you, and it's not saying that that's not a value, but how could you create something that you've never been a part of.
Well, and here's the part is that we're not, honestly, as a society, we're not there yet. There are, and I don't want to say a few, there are men who are 1,000% on board. That is not what we're suggesting.
No, for sure.
But we're still fighting.
Yeah.
That group of women is still fighting, and you have to surround yourself with people who understand from the inside, from the lived experience, the fight at this stage.
Yeah.
Once we get past that, there's more room.
Yeah.
But right now it needs to, and it is. That group is like as tight-knit as it ever could be based on that.
Yeah. And so the one thing I do want to say, because Cowie just made a good point, is please don't take any of this personal. Like,
no.
Like there have been, I've been coach mentor to a bunch of guys that have worked in the minor hockey system. There's just a shift that needs to happen when it comes to that, because I've also been on the other side of it where, you're in meetings and you have 4 qualified women put their name in to coach a team and they give it to the one guy that applies. It's like, we're not even trying in some situations, right? So, but don't take any of this personal. And if you have any feedback on anything that we're saying, please reach out, because we're always down for a good conversation. But it goes back to this whole thing of creating a value system. And I think that that's where it's going to change. Like if all the girls that played hockey with us growing up, now they have daughters. Now that value system is going to change. But how do we do it with the girls that are in it right now? And for me, like, it's the way we talk. It always comes back to, is your coach saying the right things? Are they taking it as serious as they would a boys team? Or is it like, oh, well, they've always done it, so they're just going to do it again. You know, it's this energy and it's the atmosphere for me that creates the whole thing. And it's just, we have to start talking differently.
Yep. I've lived the experience across multi-sports. I played boys ball also and boys hockey. And I was fortunate in that I had, to me, really good coaches who made me feel included. This is one thing I just do want to touch on too, is that there's lots of great coaches out there, and there's lots of great hockey teams, and there's lots of people who are super open to accepting a girl on their team. But also what comes with that, if you're making that choice for your daughter, is that anyone who's played boys has also lived that, and they probably have too. You've changed in janitor closets, or cafeterias, or with the one girl on the opposing team, which is just gross to me. You don't always get the inside jokes in the locker room. You question if they're about you. Yeah. When you get in there, you go out on the ice, and you run into a handful of teams or a handful of people on the other team each year that want to run you because you're the girl. I had great experiences. I had boys who were my best friends who, quite honestly, it was embarrassing in some of the times where they, like, you don't need to jump the boards. Yeah. I'm fine. Yeah. But I remember the first girls team I played on, and the feeling of being in a dressing room, being included, being a part of the whole thing, seeing yourself and your peers, all of those pieces from a psychological and social development perspective are important. And I have vivid memories of that first dressing room.
Oh, yeah.
Being able to shower after a hockey game for me was wild, because you can't shower in the janitor's closet. No. Or you got to wait till all the boys are done and then use the locker room. Yeah.
If we should go down a little bit of a rabbit hole of dressing rooms that we've had.
Because I remember, sorry to interrupt you. I remember, and I was like, how is this sanitary? Being in an arena and reaching to my left and eating a cherry blaster because I was changing in the cafeteria or whatever that is, the kitchen. They just closed the doors, put the little like rolly garage door down in the front, and sat a chair in there. So I stole a cherry blaster, FYI, but eating a freaking cherry blaster because I am changing in the kitchen of the arena.
I was once in a, like the sheet curtains.
Yeah.
They put 4 sheet curtains with a female dressing room with a piece pinned to the fabric. Taped to the fabric. And then so I like looked in there and it was one chair. It was in the middle of the lobby.
Oh.
And then my mom was like, I'll just stand right here. I was like, thanks. Thanks. I got like security out front, but it's like, that's like, and that's the hard part is we've lived all those. Girls don't have to go through that shit anymore.
Yeah. And so exactly. And so I think we both have this, again, make the best choice for your kid, taking all of the right things into consideration. But at the end of the day, we are starting to see there are female teams that are at an elite level that are accessible to you. And I would have killed for that when I was a kid.
Totally. There is absolutely no question about it. And the fact that these girls and women are performing at such a high level and they still get the, 4th ice time of the night. They still get all this stuff.
Out of town ice.
Yeah. Like we're going to have boys provincials right in town in the multiplex. That's incredible. And the girls were going to go 25 minutes out to a random rink in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. It's like, how did that decision get decided? Yeah. Who was like, yep, this makes sense, instead of true equality, one girls game, one boys game, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have connection between the boys and the girls teams, it's going to be tough, right? Because there's always going to be this divide. But if you have them back to back and go, okay, we're at provincials. It's provincials for everybody.
Yeah, for this age category.
We're going to start off with this group. And then everybody sticks around and watches everything back to back. Let people watch the girls.
Yep.
Put them front row center. Let them be watched. Let them be seen, so that people stop this feeling of like, oh, well, there's just not enough girls. Says who?
Yeah, you just can't see them because they get shoved out of town.
In one area last year alone, there was 650 novice girls.
Yeah, which is incredible.
You can't make it up.
Yeah. And we have to, and that goes back to what we were saying very, very early on of if they're afforded equal opportunity, equal expectation, equal practice time, we can't continue to shelf the girls.
Yeah.
We can't dust them off.
Yeah, totally. And to go on a whole other point too is like, so this girl just gets drafted into the WHL.
Yeah.
We have the goalie last year that gets drafted and plays in the dub.
Yeah.
What's the end game here?
That's my question also.
Now
and again to the badge of honor.
It's the badge of honor, and when you look at it, what does that now do to all the 10 and under girls that are looking up? Yeah. Now they're like, oh, sweet. Now I want to get drafted to the WHL, instead of being like, I want to play on these teams so I could go to university and follow your actual path.
Instead of knowing that there are women fighting to create a league that they can dream to be drafted in. Instead of them being able to say, Mom, Dad, did you know that there's women working on creating the PWHPA, and at some point I might be able to be drafted into the PWHPA?
The classiest thing, like we've talked about how Marie-Philippe Poulin is like, stitched into Canadian flag. She's just like the most unreal person ever. Yeah. But she was offered a paying contract to play
with the boys.
She was going to be paid to play with the boys. And her response was, no, thank you. Can you please take that and put it towards the girls?
Yeah.
And I'm like, is there anything classier than that? But that's the point.
Yeah.
Is there is a whole group of people working day in and day out to be able to offer these girls a life, you know, like the girls in the NWSL and the WNBA get to live, and tennis and golf and all these places.
Yep.
And in hockey, for some reason, we're like, well, what, should they play with the boys? It's like there's so much. For me, those girls getting drafted shows that there's such a high level of athletic women out there that they're getting drafted to the dub. Great. But we're not thinking about the flip side of it.
Yeah.
We're not thinking about
what that says.
What that actually and truly says. Because what's the end game? What's the end game? The amount of time. So, well, I should look up exactly what year this is. I can't really, but that one female goaltender that was played for Tampa Bay for that game or whatever.
Rayom. That was before Ashley has a Rayom jersey.
Oh.
So Ash is 40. So it's before me and you, but not long probably.
So.
Or like when we were really little.
Little. And I still have people being like, isn't that just the neatest?
Yeah.
Isn't it just the neatest thing that happened with that girl playing in the NHL? I'm like, that was 100 years ago. Like, don't get me wrong. Yay.
Totally. 1000%.
Yay for her. That's awesome. But what?
That's our reference.
That's still our reference. And yeah. And this whole other conversation we can get into about how, like, you're only valued at the top if you get onto our national team. Like,
yeah,
we only have 20 good hockey players in Canada. It's like, who do you think that those women compete with?
Oh,
the other 4 years of their career.
Exactly.
A bunch of schmubs.
Yeah.
Like,
no, they just, that is a very good point, is that, and I think that's also a good point that people need to recognize, is that the members of the national team very much recognize that. Why do you think they're putting in the effort of the PWHPA? Because if they can't compete on a regular basis, they do not stay elite.
Yeah. Yeah. They have to surround themselves with the best.
Yes. You have to be pushed every time you're on the ice.
And so I would encourage for everybody to shift the conversation. Instead of it being, why should we play with boys to be more competitive? How are we not creating competitive young women?
Yes. And what can we collectively do to make an actual change?
And let them know it's okay at a young age.
Yeah, yeah.
Let them know it's okay for 6-year-old Cowie to play Red Rover across the yard. And
clothesline. I had we had so many people reach out after that, which I'm glad you guys all found humor in the fact that I got steamrolled playing Red Rover. But you're right, it is. And my mom's response, which says it all. She said, you put your big girl panties on and tried again.
That's right. That's right. We're going to have to get Mama Bear on the show.
Oh boy, we need more than 45 minutes for that.
Because I truly believe in the core of this question is, the core of it all is, we need to start asking different questions.
Yeah.
We need to start changing it from, oh, well, and it is not a badge of honor that your daughter plays boys hockey. It's not. And I'm sorry to break that to every parent who thinks that it is. It is not. Your daughter going to a team, having an unreal experience, being a good person, learning, being competitive, pushing her teammates, that's the badge of honor. And growing it like crazy. That's the badge of honor. To be I could go on for days, but I think that at the core of this whole thing, we need to start talking to younger girls differently, and we have to start shifting the questions that we ask about it.
Mm-hmm. And we have to think about the words we say and the way that they are perceived.
Yeah.
And what we're not saying.
And what we're not saying. That's very true.
Yeah.
That is very true.
That was a 44-ish minute answer that wasn't an answer to a question that we could talk about for like days.
Yeah.
But I couldn't agree more. That's the challenge is we've said it on, I'm going to throw out there 28 episodes so far, that there's a lot of work we can do. And I think this just highlights it, is that we're well on our way.
Yeah.
When we look around, there are more women who are coaching. You're having conversations about women who need to change what their level of commitment is, but don't need to change the fact that they can commit.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that we also need to do better as a society, is that we have a lot of women who have a ton of knowledge and a ton of talent who are at an age where they're building families and careers. And so maybe their commitment to this can't be a full-time, twice a week, 3 times a week thing, but that doesn't change the value that they can bring. And we need to be more flexible in how we allow women to commit to growing and helping, move this forward.
Yeah. And creating competitiveness as a value very young.
Yeah.
I agree with you. We need to do more creative things to keep the women that are in the game further, especially when they're in this really unique spot in life of having kids and all that kind of stuff. It's huge, because that is how the trickle effect happens.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Totally. So
on a lighter note, I'm going to, not that wasn't light, but there was some funny. So on the Instagram poll,
yeah,
I do appreciate that everyone is willing to admit that they're just as washed up as me.
I was going to say, if you're going to just washed up as Cowie.
Just as washed up, but I still play. Most of you listening that interacted with us on Instagram still play sports, which just makes me so freaking happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that is also the point, and that's what we need to make sure we tell our young girls as they're growing up, is that it is a choice that you can make today to stay active and participate and have peers and be competitive well beyond your really, really competitive years, whether that be at, high school, prep, university, PWHPA, whatever, go to Europe. But
right.
I'm so happy to hear that there are 30-plussers like me that are still playing the game.
That's right. Absolutely. That was so funny. That was awesome. So thank you, everybody, for your feedback, your comments. We will talk about it all. Mm-hmm. We take it very serious, and we absolutely love engaging with you guys. So thank you so much. And Cowie, final words.
It's been a fun episode. I think it was about time for us to have a bit of a more hard conversation, and one that hopefully spurred some thoughts with you guys. So if this is your first episode here, welcome to Beauty Sports. If this is your 28th or 9th episode, whatever we're on, thank you for coming back. For all of you who engage with us on Instagram, thank you. If you don't follow us already, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Beauty Sports Talk, on Twitter at _Beauty Sports. We have a voicemail, speakpipe.com/Beauty Sports. Our website, you can get some merch at beautysports.com. And really engage with us in every way, shape, or form. One way that helps us the most is if you rate and review the podcast.
Yes.
So if you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, if you can leave a 5 stars only rate and review, we would appreciate it. Ads, I appreciate you every week, my friend.
Thank you. And I appreciate you too, man. Have a good week, everybody. And we will see you next week.